stars, walk with me down Theory Lane. Did Thomas Kingston have a fake funeral? Every single article about this funeral informs us that William was present at it, but there is no photo and no evidence. So let's examine how flimsy the facts are that it even happened. The bottom line is that there is no evidence that Thomas Kingston even had a funeral on March 12th. We all accept that Thomas Kingston lost his life and that his body was processed and eventually cremated, but it is unclear that he had any kind of service in the way that it's been reported. The reports of his funeral could have been fabricated to send one message: William was present at his funeral. Just the day prior, on March 11th, Camilla and William appeared and were photographed sitting together at Westminster Abbey to mark Commonwealth Day. There are quite a few photos from that day, as there are the many days before. Folks will say there is a media block on these stories, but evidence shows there are many photos of the royals taken and published the same day, which makes it extremely strange that the next day there are no photos from the funeral of Thomas Kingston, an event that allegedly had 140 guests, including Prince William, and had a funeral procession that went from Kensington Palace to St. James Palace. No photos from outside, inside, or direct quotes from anyone who attended that funeral. At this point, there was no official statement from Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace on the unaliving of Thomas Kingston, and no announced services. The funeral was first reported by Richard Eden to the Daily Mail at 12:44 EDT on March 12th, the same date as the alleged service. Now we are seeing articles in late May saying Lady Gabriella is being asked to appear at the Trooping of the Colors and that there will be another larger service in honor of Thomas Kingston in June. Why are they having another service? And why would there be a second one? Why was the first one so small? How did the first service manage to stay so private when it was 140 people, including the Prince of Wales? There is a Daily Beast article that claims Buckingham Palace had requested that no media attend the service. Was the service ever announced? No. Did we ever see the email to the news outlets telling them no press allowed? If there is no media allowed, why would Buckingham Palace immediately confirm William's attendance and allow a dozen stories to run the same day? Sure, that's how you keep something private. There is a sense that no matter how you slice it, the most active and consistent member of the royal family has been Queen Camilla. She's been more photographed and busy doing events and other things than anyone else. And she was just with William the day before. She's remained the biggest show horse of them all this year. And she's not present for this tragic funeral. That seems very odd. As with much of this Kate is Missing saga, it's not clear how exactly this piece fits or what it means, but it is a piece of the puzzle, no doubt. They want us to believe that Thomas Kingston's unaliving was not suspicious and that William appeared at his funeral. So there are some key dates, and there are words from the coroner, from the local law enforcement, as well as official statements from the palace. The big picture is that Thomas Kingston was unalived on Sunday, February 25th, 2024. Thomas Kingston's unaliving was announced on February 27th. Then, Buckingham Palace released a statement through an unnamed spokesperson informing everyone that the King and the Queen have been informed of Thomas's unaliving and join Prince and Princess Michael of Kent and all those who knew him in grieving a much-loved member of the family. Their Majesties send their most heartfelt thoughts and prayers to Gabriella and to all the Kingston family. Next, an inquest into the unaliving was opened Friday, March 1st. We do have a sense of what else was going on. End of February, beginning of March. Allegedly, no royals came to the short hearing at the court in Gloucester, but an official from the household did. Having been satisfied with identification, initial cause of unaliving, and the brief circumstances surrounding Mr. Kingston's unaliving, I can formally open this inquest. I now adjourn it to a date to be fixed. No members of the Kingston family were present, although an official from the royal household attended. Why? As did several members of the media. Next, a funeral was held on Tuesday, March 12th, 24, in London, or was it? According to Sky News, Kingston's casket traveled from Kensington Palace to the Chapel Royal before the hour-long service that began at 11:30 a.m. The BBC reports that the service was followed by a reception at St. James Palace and a private cremation. Tom's body had been carried by hearse in a funeral procession from Kensington. Lady Gabriella was joined by her parents, her brother, Lord Frederick Windsor, and his wife, the actress Sophie Winkleman. Who attended the funeral? On Tuesday, Prince William joined a group of 140 mourners in London to honor the life of Thomas Kingston, the husband of Lady Gabriella Kingston, who died February 25th at age 45. The funeral took place at Chapel Royal, a small chapel in St. James Palace, and other royal guests, including Gabriella's parents, Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, the Duke of Kent, Princess Alexandra, Thomas's parents, Martin and Jill Kingston, and his two sisters, Joanna Connolly and Emma Murray, were also present. King Charles was not in attendance as he continues to step back from public outings amid his cancer treatment. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla had prior commitments to host a reception at Buckingham Palace on Tuesday morning. The next big brushstroke is that another service will be held in the future, and that's where we are now. A larger scale memorial service is expected to be held in honor of Mr. Kingston in due course. There was a private cremation. According to Richard Eden, Kingston's family, in partnership with the royal family, have organized a memorial service for the late financier. Some of Kingston's friends have already been invited. It will be a wonderful chance to celebrate his life. There's some big puzzles associated with this matter. Number one, the coroner's statement. Usually coroners in the U.S. stick only to the absolute facts. They would never say he was unalived from a catastrophic head wound and a pew-pew was found nearby. There's far too much ambiguity in that statement. If he was unalived by self-harm with a pew-pew, they would state he was unalived by a self-inflicted pew-pew nugget wound to the head. Coroners, by leaving this so vague, it lets you associate the pew-pew with the head injury, right? The injury doesn't necessarily match the pew-pew found. Blue Star asks, do coroners in the UK do and say whatever the royals want them to based on the evidence? Yes. I'd bet cash money the injury does not match the pew-pew found, as the pew-pew would be a long one or a rifle, and the injury would be from a royal bodyguard issue, 9mm. Orange Sickle says, if you look at the URL for some of these articles with the coroner's quote, the word pew-pew impact is in the URL. It looks like some shady SEO manipulation to make an article about his unaliving show up with pew-pew impact, even though the coroner never said pew-pew impact wound. It was very carefully stated as, quote, catastrophic and traumatic head wound with a pew-pew near They want us to make that leap because it is a lie. They don't want to claim it was a pew-pew impact to the head. So they sneakily put it in the URL and make it confusing enough with statements about self-harm and if you need help info at the bottom of the article that they want everyone to believe he pew-pewed himself, right? An example is people.com, Thomas Kingston, unalive, traumatic head wound, pew-pew impact, Lady Gabriella husband, cause of death, age 45, 860-2940. Green Circle says, exactly. They knew people would see head wound and pew-pew and make the leap to he pew-pewed himself. They muddied the waters intentionally. Pete's Shirt comments, catastrophic head injury never sounded to me like a pew-pew impact, but I can understand why most people would not give it a second thought. Someone mentions Jill Dando. I don't know much about her situation, but what I do know is that, so much of a big deal has been made about that Pippa Middleton dated Thomas Kingston. So it sounds like she didn't go to funeral number 1 in question. Will she make it to the second one? Unclear. She did go to Thomas Kingston's wedding in 2019 with her husband, the giraffe. And furthermore, cremation? Why? Blonde Bang says, jumps right out as hugely suspicious because the body can't be exhumed or testified to as to the nature and number of wounds. Large head wound and pew-pew near the body does not do as in the US, where there would be clear designation of GSW. Suspicious for a royal to be cremated. Further, it is curious that the father did not hear the pew-pew impact, nor the mother. Why was there an interlock on this shed? Usually the lock is on the outside in the form of a padlock to keep valuables from being stolen. Were other pew-pews stored here so that it could be rightly claimed that there was a pew-pew nearby? Was it a short one? Was it a long one? Why open an inquest at all if it was all cut and dried? I don't know the customary time for lunch to be served, but from then to 6:25, or allowing for the 30-minute search 6 p.m. when it was undertaken a long afternoon to not have left for home. Why did they think he was still there at 6 p.m.? A spat with the wife? No plans to go back before Monday to work? I had read somewhere that the home of his father was about a 15-minute drive from Highgrove. A curious notation to be sure. I read that there had been a party at Highgrove on Saturday evening, and it was closer to just drive there afterward. A poster said William was also at the party at Highgrove. Now, to add to your timeline, a friend of Charles and longtime pseudo caretaker / huntsman at Highgrove was unalived. A Captain Ian Farquhar, said to have a daughter named Rose, a different Rose, who was a former girlfriend of William's. He was unalived 1 week later on March 8th, 7 days after the inquest was open. Not saying they are linked, just a curious thing. This party at Highgrove, I would love to know more about it. Then we know that the Wikipedia page for Thomas Kingston was taken down. And Brown Bob asks, can the bishop from the funeral be contacted? Some information requested under Freedom of Information. Orange Circle says, I wonder. It took quite a lot of digging, and it was only that one article that actually named anyone that conducted the service. Brown Bob replies, Wikipedia states that Richard Shart retired in 2017. Orange Circle replies, which confirms he won't be able to be contacted. If it is possible that retired clergy comes in for funeral services, but it was absolutely strategic for them to name someone who can't be reached. What? Then Green Circle says, emergency services were called at around 6:25 p.m. He was unalived after lunch on Sunday, and they called emergency services 6 hours later. Why? I think his unaliving is completely suspicious. Blue Circle asks, do we know how big the estate was? It could have been huge. His parents may have assumed he left, and there may have been plenty of room for him to go somewhere else on the estate and not be seen. I mean, if you were going to unalive yourself, I can see wanting a very isolated place if it was self-harm. His wife may have called a few hours after he went there looking for him, and it could only have been then his parents started looking for him. Brown Bob replies, what I found odd was his own father supposedly forced entry to his own locked outbuilding. Surely he had a key to it, and why suspect him to be in there if there was no noise? Green Circle said after a half hour his mother went looking for him. I don't think it took them long to find him from what I've read, but who knows? Orange Headband says his mother went to look for him 30 minutes after his dad returned from the walk. We have no idea what time lunch was, how long it took, or how long his father was out on the walk. 6:35 p.m. does sound late, though, for the call, but the details will come out in the inquest. Orange Circle says, you mean the adjourned inquest that will never be revisited? Pink Fox says, very sketchy. He wasn't a royal, though, only by marriage, so I was surprised he had such a fancy funeral. I wonder if he had been unalived elsewhere and the body moved to the shed. He must have popped out not telling his mother, or he did, and they have been told to keep quiet about what really happened. From what I understand, there was a small private funeral, which I took to mean family and close friends, not over 100 people. Under the circumstances, this made sense to me because often people are reeling and in shock, and a bigger memorial service would be taking place in a few months. Don't forget William's neck bruising at the service for the Godfather a few days after the unaliving. This is all tied in. Orange Circle replies, the bruising was seen on February 29th after Kingston's unaliving and after the funeral / Thanksgiving service for his godfather when he visited the West Marble Arch Synagogue in London. Lots of misinformation that the bruises were seen either at the Thanksgiving service or at the Thomas Kingston funeral, but he was not pictured at either. From the article, it marked a return to work for the prince who missed a memorial service for his godfather, King Constantine of Greece, on Tuesday for undisclosed personal reasons. Hexagon says, one thing that I never caught before is that Kingston had lunch with his parents and then his father took the dogs for a walk. They searched for 30 minutes before breaking down the door that was locked and found his body. Yet the ambulance wasn't called until 6:25 p.m. I realized that when you find someone who is obviously unalive, there isn't an urgency to call for an ambulance or morgue right away. Sometimes the family must just take time to grasp what happened. How could his family be sure that it was self-harm and not purposeful unaliving, though, at that point? If they were surprised he did this, then I think you'd want to bring in the police ASAP in case it was purposeful unaliving. Even if they had a late lunch, say finishing up around 2:30 to 3 p.m., then add an hour for walking the dogs, they waited a long time to report it. Orange Circle, the timeline does not make sense. After lunch is not 6 p.m., and although they claim emergency services were called, they also say his dad found him deceased. None of the articles have any doubt as to whether he was already deceased. If I find my son in that state, I'm calling an ambulance and will not accept he is deceased until they try to save him, which just seems odd. It should be more like, he was found unresponsive with a massive wound and determined to be deceased when EMS arrived, but it wasn't. The articles imply the dad determined he was unalive as soon as he saw him, and emergency services were called to the report of a deceased man, not the report of a wounded person. Pink T-shirt adds, if his head was smashed like an egg, then it was rather obvious there was no point to do CPR. Orange circle, in that case I want details on the pew-pew, because unless it was a long one, self-harm, people's heads don't end up smashed like an egg from a single pew-pew nugget to it. Pink T-shirt, 100% agree. That's why I am not comfortable with the description catastrophic head injury instead of pew-pew nugget wound. Every pathologist would agree that's two totally different terms. Orange headband, I think you can imagine what the catastrophic injuries were to his head for his dad to determine he was unalive. Orange circle, why imagine instead of asking? A pew-pew near? No one else involved? Hard for me to imagine this injury. A single pew-pew nugget impact to the head in a self-harm doesn't always render a trauma that makes their unaliving obvious. And we don't have any details on the pew-pew that was found. What type of head trauma? Where? On his head, face, back of head? So why would I imagine instead of asking questions? Orange headband, because more details will come out at the inquest, so we just have to be patient and wait for that. His injuries must have been severe enough, or maybe his father took his pulse for him to report an unaliving. Fox says, yeah, very sketchy. He wasn't a royal, though, only by marriage, so I was surprised he had such a fancy funeral. I wonder if he was unalived elsewhere and the body moved to the shed. He must have popped out not telling his mother, or he did and they have been told to keep quiet about what really happened. From what I understand, there was a small private funeral, which I took to mean family and close friends, not over 100 people. Under the circumstances, this made sense to me because often people are reeling and in shock, and a bigger memorial service would be taking place in a few months. Don't forget William's neck bruising at the service for the Godfather in a few days after the pew-pewing. This is all tied in. Orange circle, the bruising was seen on February 29th after Kingston's unaliving and after the funeral/Thanksgiving service for his godfather when he visited the Western Marble Arch Synagogue in London. Lots of misinfo that the bruises were seen either at the Thanksgiving service or the Thomas Kingston funeral, but he was not pictured at either. From the article, it marked a return to work for the prince who missed a memorial service for his godfather, King Constantine of Greece, on Tuesday for undisclosed personal reasons. Glasses says the memorial service peripherally connected to this was for King Constantine II, a year after his actual unaliving. Why that long a delay, one wonders, only to have William cancel when what? What? I deduced it might be because while he was William's godfather, he was also coincidentally named godfather for Gabriella. So her parents were close to King Constantine and would be attending this service. Had William forgotten they would be there? So, at the literal 11th and a half hour before the event, he pulls out, only to claim much later that it was that moment he was told Kate had cancer. After how many protestations over the previous 6, almost 7 weeks that it was not cancer related. It kept coming up because of the king's alleged diagnosis and each time denied. All this to say, they do a larger memorial service even up to a year after an unaliving, apparently. Glasses says maybe to do with the circumstances of unaliving and it being a private service, but a larger memorial service where former coworkers, friends from the club, her circle of friends planned for later. These people would have been excluded from attending the funeral itself, and it really isn't unheard of in the U.S. There are often private funerals and then larger memorials held for people who are well known. Blue Alien, I don't know what the stigma is like in the UK, but having him commit self-harm, if it was that, could be a reason they wanted a small, more private funeral, although 140 people is a lot by many people's standards. Green Alien, if you think the funeral was fake, could his unaliving also be faked? Sometimes with a traumatic head injury, the person might not be easily identified, and the emergency services took such a long time. It's just a thought. Orange circle. It's definitely something worth considering because the ones closest to him have not been seen since the announcement of his unaliving. I also have reason to believe that Thomas Kingston was not present at the alleged last photo on Wednesday, February 14th at the celebration of Shakespeare at Grosvenor House, Park Lane Hotel in London. Camilla was definitely there. Lots of pics were seen. Only a couple of pics of Thomas Kingston and Ella, and only one singular picture of her brother with his wife, Lord Frederick and Sophie Winkleman. When reverse image searching either of the couple's shots from that night, nothing really comes up. Some places these images are credited as Alpha Press or Blitz Pictures. Alpha Press does have a website with the photos, but it feels very planted. I do not think these images were from that night. They aren't shown in any other pics or group shots. It is unclear when was the last time he was actually seen. The next event on February 21st, a National Gallery event in London, had no photos, and an unnamed friend was later quoted about this, saying they were in a good mood that night. It is eerie to me that there has been no official statement from Buckingham Palace why release the news through an unnamed spokesperson. It is also a bit contradictory when you read every article about his unaliving. Some say that Buckingham Palace announced the unaliving, but then they were also informed of it by the Kingston family. So we are to believe the Kingstons/Lady Ella wanted to release their own statement, but they did it through Buckingham Palace, but not a written statement with the official header. Through the media? Again, recall at this point we have had several odd official statements about cancer, treatment, etc., officially released by Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace so far in 2024. But the news of this death is never announced via official channels like royal.uk. Green circle? Strange, and I wonder if there is any connection to that other person who was unalive nearby at Highgrove around the same time. King Charles' close friend, Ian Farquhar. The article is posted on March 8th, but it doesn't say when he was unalived or what he was unalived from. Could the bodies have been switched, and maybe Thomas Kingston's parents were helping him? I know this is wild speculation, but the rich and famous have faked their unalivings before. I think wild speculation is called for in the face of so many lies being told to us. Orange circle. It just keeps going deeper because this is the first I'm hearing about the unaliving of Captain Ian Farquhar. Red antenna. Wasn't there a statement by someone saying that it was Kate's cancer diagnosis, not Thomas Kingston's self-harm, that was the reason William missed the funeral, that he had to rush to be by her side? Orange circle. Yes, at first it was for personal reasons. The article said wasn't because of Thomas Kingston and also wasn't because of his father's cancer, but didn't say why. The same day that the Kate cancer video was released, Friday, March 22nd, that is when the narrative showed up that the reason he didn't go to that funeral was because they received the diagnosis that day. On the day of the Thanksgiving service/funeral for Constantine II, Tuesday, February 27th, these were the reasons cited why Will didn't go. 1. Not related to Charles's cancer. 2. Not related to Kingston's unaliving. 3. Related to Kate's condition, ? No answer. But we know eventually the claim was that the reason William didn't go to Constantine's funeral was because of the claim was he found out about Kate's condition. Yellow circle has the last word. This sounds like Thomas was taken into witness protection. Well, stars either witness protection or witness prevention. I'm not sure what to believe. I will certainly look closer at Captain Ian Farquhar and this party that apparently happened at Highgrove. Wow. Let me know what you think.